starting from junior high school, my mother said, hey, you should start to write for the paper because it's so important to be able to write. I mean, that's the first thing, because it gives you the base, because if you write well, you can talk well, you can speak well. And so from junior high on, I was doing, writing for the school newspaper, and I also like to announce. And so in junior high, I was doing, in high school, I would do the PA for all the basketball games, the football games, and then I started to branch out a little bit. Between my junior and senior year in high school, my father lived in St. Mary's, PA, and so he was able to have me on a summertime work for the St. Mary's Daily Press. And I don't know, there may have been, 10 readers, 20 readers, actually it was more than that, but it was kind of an area that's kind of right isolated in the middle of the state. And so I came back from doing that, and I was able to get credentials to cover the Steelers. This is back in 1972. Okay, and that's the first thing that you need to be able to start on, and I would imagine a lot of you have already started that process, but you need to find some way to get credentialed so you can start to get into the people, if you want to be in this business, that you can work with. So here I was, 17 years old, it's 1972, I'm going to Steeler training camp, I'm going to every Steeler home game, I would go to Wednesday press conferences and Thursday's press conferences, and again, I was still a senior in high school. And so I had that opportunity. And then what ends up happening is that you meet all the people and they start to give you other opportunities. So at that time I was sitting next at the press box to the play-by-play announcer of the ABA basketball team, the pro basketball team in town. I did on radio not only stats for him, but sometimes I would step in and do some analyzing stuff. And here I'm 17 years old. And I got a partial scholarship to go to Syracuse because it was a good broadcasting, writing type of thing. But then I had so many opportunities in Pittsburgh to be able to work through college. So I went to Duquesne University. I had 25 jobs freelance through school. Now, obviously when you start, you don't get any money. It's like you have to do it for free. Then all of a sudden, I'm now doing AP radio, which they were paying me to go to Steeler games, Penguin games, baseball games, and I would grab sound for the network, and then I would do some maybe updates. So I was doing that. I was writing for just about every paper in town whenever they would need something. It was the Beaver County Times, the McKeesport Daily News. Eventually it was the Pittsburgh Press. And so I did that for summertime because you need to take a vacation. I like to work. So what I would do, because back in one of those years, they had a U.S. Open in town in Pittsburgh at Oakmont. So I strung together a whole bunch of stuff, loved covering that, and so then for my vacations, I would go out and go to U.S. Opens in other cities. I would go to PGA tours. I would have like enough to cover my expenses, not making a little bit more money, but I was still being able to pull all that in. So I did that all through college with the writing, the broadcasting, all that stuff, and you learn so much because, you can be taught everything by good teachers, but you need to be able to go out and execute it because, this is a business where, the more you do it, the better you become because you learn from every experience, everything that you do. And so, example, one of the things that we had in Pittsburgh, and just timing more than anything else, a bunch of students from Pitt and Duquesne, including myself, got met up with an investor, and we started a sports paper. We called it Steel City Sports. It folded, and then became Score. We call it magazine, but it was like a Score. And so that was another. I was always the Steeler guy, so I was covering that. So you get in the locker room, you're 17 now to 21 years old, and the players. And again, this is one of the greatest teams in the history of the league. Take care of you because as long as you show good integrity, good professionalism, and then you write not necessarily positive things, but you write well, all of a sudden there's a trust factor that you develop. So what happens is that I was getting stories for Steel City Sports and Score that the newspapers weren't getting because the players were telling me as much as you could never imagine, and it was phenomenal like that. And so eventually, and this is still in college, I was getting freelance things from Sporting News, Sports Illustrated. They were even doing stories on me at the age of 19, covering the baseball all-star game and all that. So you just take advantage of every opportunity you can. And so, and never try to over move where you should be. At first, get it down to a point where you can be decent at it. And then the next thing you need to do is, see what other opportunities are there. So one time I'm covering a basketball game my senior year at Duquesne, and one of the guys, because I actually had interned at the press my junior year, came over and says, hey, they're going to hire you. Now, this is like in December of my senior year in college. I said, oh, good. What are they hiring me for? Because I haven't even applied. They said, well, they're going to have you do pit basketball and work the overnight desk on editing. I said, great. It's like, when do they offer that? So the next day I get a phone call, make the offer, I take the job, still in school, I work the overnight shift, go to classes in the morning, sleep through most of those, and somehow come out with a 3.2 or 3.3. I don't know how I did it because, literally all through most nights I was either at a baseball game, weekends I was at basketball, football games, but it was great because you learn so much and you pick up so much opportunity. So you do that, and now I'm on the newspaper business, but I was still allowed to carry my freelance stuff. So I'm still at the newspaper, I'm still doing the stuff for AP, I'm still doing the stuff for all these other publications. And you just keep building, learning, trying to be as professional as you can, trying to be as good as you can. So now, in 1986, I've been at the press 11 years, and a newspaper in Tacoma, Washington called me up. And they said, listen, McClatchy is now going to buy a paper in Tacoma, and we want to hire you as the first person to compete on a newspaper war against the two bigger Seattle papers. So I said, well, how are we going to do that? And they said, well, we're going to pay you more than anybody in the market, and we'll give you a better travel budget. I said, okay. And I had turned, it's like, in certain cities like Pittsburgh and that, you never think of moving. I had turned down a chance to go to Philadelphia, Boston, all these different places. But this thing kind of intrigued me. So it's like, okay, so now you want me to start a newspaper war. And I go out there, and the editor was a guy that was an off-the-record guy because he was big. He used to cover basketball, knows Peter Vesey and all that stuff. Peter was always one off the record. And I said, no. Here, if we're going to start the war, here's how we're going to do it. We're not going to do off-the-record stuff. We're just going to put the facts in and put it that way and see how it will respond. And the great part was we were getting stuff, at least on my beat, and then they bulked everybody up in the other beats. We were getting stuff, and when everybody was trying to catch up, we were getting 2 and 3 stories ahead. So within a year, we were APSE top 10. We'd increased circulation from like 106 to 128. The Sunday circulation went from 108 to 150. We were having a blast. And so, that was, one of the best opportunities I had because I had the opportunity, the rare opportunity to be the first person to start a newspaper war. And somehow, I guess you could say, we had victory. So now, we get to about 1994, and I get a call from ESPN that, Chris Mortensen at that time was thinking about going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Chris has been a good friend. In fact, he wanted me to, I was in Tacoma, and he wanted me to take his job, because he was getting a promotion in Atlanta, wanted me to take his job and cover the Falcons. I said, nah, I think this thing in Seattle was pretty good. Because, not only was I doing that, but I was doing another thing I love, which is doing the radio. Because I had a radio show, and that was going pretty well. And then, everything was going great from all that. But so they had an open call of about 80 people to come in and audition for doing some TV stuff. And so I interviewed at, in fact, Mike Tirico was the anchor who had me on the audition. And so what they did is they hired me part-time to do information for what was like the beginning of NFL Live, and to have a radio contract, and then help out on some other stuff. So then the next year they ripped up the contract and they had me do TV notebooks, which was inside the huddle. Then the next year they ripped it up and added more things, and they kept on saying, "Hey, you want to come full-time ESPN?" And I said, "No, I'm a newspaper guy. I don't want that." So finally in '98, ESPN the magazine was starting, and now they said, "Okay, here's your juncture. Now you got the best of all worlds. You can write, you can broadcast, you can do all that stuff." And so I finally said yes, and it's just been a blast ever since. And so kind of taking it from just some bratty little kid who used to sit there and not eat the food and watch the games to somebody that was able to work for ESPN, which is just an unbelievable company as far as support, as far as what the energy that's there, the love for sports, the professionalism, all those things fall into place. And I can't tell you how fortunate it has been. You know, to be there that long, work with as many people as I have. You know, the weird part is, you know, everything is done from my house. You know, I don't go to Bristol. I've been to Bristol 3 times since 2001. Now, I used to go there from the beginning when I was there a bunch, but not necessarily now because they put a camera in my house. And so that's great because, you know, I can eat Chinese food and, you know, listen to Slayer. Doesn't get any better than that. So, you may not get to the face-to-face with a lot of the people that you work with, but still, you know, you're working with some of the best people in the industry, and you learn from them, and you try to just do as much as you possibly can. So it's been a wonderful experience, something that I've been very, very fortunate to get into, and hopefully it'll continue for the longest possible time, because it's, you know, when you get with a good company, you know, you can take 1 or 2 tacks. You can say, okay, I'm going to angle for this to get this job over here and all that stuff. But the great part about ESPN, they want you to work all the time. I haven't had a day off since July 10th. And so, you know, the guy who was in college going out there and taking his vacations on golf courses, you know, working for 5 different entities, is something that was great. So it's one where I hope everybody would have similar opportunities. The great part is now it's so different because as much as it seems, you look and you say, well, what am I going to do in the future? There's still more opportunities because there wasn't an internet. I mean, I couldn't go ahead and create my own website when computers weren't even available in some of those early days. And so, you know, it's a matter that it's always changing. You've always got to adapt. You've always got to adjust. The one thing that I love particularly now is that information that was never there is readily available. I mean, I used to, one of the things when I was covering the Steelers, they wanted me to do every year was get the salary survey. And those salary surveys were just kind of a summation of certain players, but not all players. And you have to go to different lengths to be able to do it. Now, you can download all the salaries of every National Football League team. I get every contract in the league, so even some of the ones that are not on Over the Cap or Sport Track or something like that, I get every contract. And so I built a database that has all 32 teams' salary caps, top 51. You know, I'm able to do analytical things with it. You know, there's so much stat information that can be analytical, and so you keep adjusting to the information that's there, trying to be as relevant as you possibly can, and realize, okay, what you did before may not necessarily be as good now, but if you go ahead and keep advancing it, it's almost like I'm in a college education class myself every day, just gathering the information and taking advantage of it and putting it out there. But you can learn so much more than what was readily available many, many years ago. So it's a great time. You don't know how it's going to work, but if you work, you do good work, and then keep meeting people that can give you opportunities, then things are going to advance.
Questions?
And again, I can go on for an hour. Yes.
What's your most memorable interview?
Let's see.
That sticks out to you.
Because I still remember, because you know, you go to great players and see if they can trust you. And I'll give you 2 examples. Now, this is the one I'll tell you second. It wasn't my favorite, but usually any chance to, and I hate to bring it up in this room, interview Brett Favre, because I mean, Favre was much like Terry Bradshaw. Because, you know, as a 17-year-old kid, I was kind of raised on Terry Bradshaw. And Bradshaw was he was unbelievable. They're the same guys. I mean, it's like you go to Bradshaw. I remember one time I was at a Denver playoff game. It was out in Denver, so we're in the hotel, and it's like 5 in the morning. I was sleeping. It was a Sunday morning, so I go downstairs to get some coffee, and there's Bradshaw. And I said, Terry, what are you doing down here? It's 5 in the morning. He goes, I can't sleep before games. I can't sleep. Why can't you sleep? He says, I don't know. It's like, I just get nervous before games. And he says, and I turn on the TV and had this movie, Exorcist 2. And all these bugs flying around. I got out of my head, and I just couldn't do it. So every time I would go to Favre, I mean, it was an adventure every time. Because like at one time I caught him at training camp, and Billy Joe Tolliver was there with him. And you know, to learn things, you have to develop trust. You burn somebody, he gets around real fast. I mean, your job is to report, and you report good stories, and you report bad stories. I've had stories that I've broken race fixing stories and horse racing. I've had people throw me against walls and things like that. So you get bad stories, but you have to be professional about it. So here's Brett with Billy Joe Tolliver. and they were talking about Brett's drinking days in Atlanta in his first year. And so, like, and Billy Joe said, "Hey, Brett, how about that time you sit in the back of the room with alcohol in your breath and you're blowing it in the face of your quarterback coach?" It's like, okay. And he said, "Oh yeah." I said, "That was bad." Yeah. And so, yeah, and then it's like, he said, "Oh yeah, what about the time you missed the team meeting?" He said, "Oh yeah." It's like, he says, "Yeah, I'll tell you that one." He says, "I'm out there." He says, "Got drunk the night before. I wake up. I realize I'm going to be late for practice. So I hop in the car, drive in there, hardly wearing anything. I get out to the field. I get out to the parking lot. Here's Jerry Glanville, the coach." And he goes, he's looking at me and he says, "So where were you?" He goes, "Had an accident." Had an accident. He's like, he looks at the car and says, "Looks fine to me." No. My friend drove me up here and he had an accident." He says, "Is that the one you're going to go with?" He goes, "No, how about this? When I was driving down here, I saw an accident." And so he goes, "You're benched." Because he missed a team picture, that didn't go over too well. But, guys like that, because every year, and you could tell, every time you asked Brett Favre a question, he would pause. Because he would start to go through his mind and say, "Okay, what have I told?" It's like, I got to come up with something good. And so perhaps he'd pause and think about it and be thoughtful enough to kind of say, "Okay, I'll give you more." It's like, I hadn't told this one before, so how about this? So then, one of my great journalistic mistakes in life, which actually was not bad, was one where when I was 49, I had a problem with my colon, and so I had 18 inches of my colon taken out. So I was doing radio shows the next day after surgery. I was writing within 2 days, and I was going on to football games in Kent. So I tell Bart, I said, "Hey, Brett, how about this?" And I tell him that story. He goes, "Oh yeah, oh yeah." It's like, "I remember when they took my intestines out." And I said, I couldn't have found anybody worse to tell this story. Because in his senior year in college, he had 30 inches of his intestines. He had a car accident and had 30 inches of his intestines taken out. He says, "Oh yeah." He says, "Doctors told me they took my entire stomach and put it on my chest and was operating on it the whole day." And I look at him and I go, "Boy, don't I feel like a wimp." And so I said, "Oh, but I'll tell you one." I was like, "I didn't take any pain medication." And he looks at me and says, "Well, I became a drug addict." He trusted me enough to give me that quote, not to put in print. You got to realize there's some things that you want to continue to talk to somebody, but it's like that. So, guy, that was probably, he's one of my favorites because you always get good stuff.